up the shaft and keeps it lubricated, but it also creates pressure and controls the heat as it's going through this particular process. So on the next slide, there'll be a breakdown of what the heat looks like as it's going around in this tube and what this, you can see how the grooves are angled and what it actually causes for the heat in these particular grooves. So there's actually pressure that's equally displaced around the entire tube to keep this at the right position, in the right lubrication, and the right amount of pressure. And so I want people to keep in mind that this fluid basically, as your drive is off and it sits there, that the content basically will kind of seep down to the bottom again, and it'll be sitting at the bottom waiting for it to spin up so that it can actually cause the fluid to go back up the shaft. So if it's cold outside and you have your hard drive in the trunk of your car or your laptop in the trunk of your car and you bring it in and you immediately turn it on without waiting for it to heat up from a frozen temperature or something, it may affect how thick this fluid is, which is essentially ester oil, which is something that's kind of like what you put in your car, Penzake or something like that. So this fluid, you have to kind of keep in mind that this is also affected by temperature, and it may cause you physical problems, may cause your drive to seize or cause other problems with your drive because metal contracts as it's cold, and fluid contracts and gets thicker based on temperature. So there's a lot of these things that make a difference to the drive, and you've got to take those into account, which is what I'm basically trying to document so that people can understand why they seize. It's gotten progressively worse as platters have gotten heavier, and there's more platters around the spindle. And so you're putting a lot of pressure on these, this pin in this area. And I've seen them snap off. I've seen them twist. I've seen them just lock down. And once that happens, this is a very, very difficult task to replace. And up until now has been very expensive to do. I've basically come up with a way to do this with parts from a second hard drive and do it for less than $100.
Wow. That is amazing. That is
Yeah, it's
how. Well, first of all, I got just a couple questions up to this point, and then we'll talk about that because that sounds killer. How many drives now are using the fluid bearings? When did they stop using ball?
basically you're looking almost all of them after 2005 have started going to fluid bearings. There's some instances before that, but it's generally 2005 and on, bigger, smoother. I mean, and you'll see it on the box. They were originally advertising a lot. It was a big deal because you basically lose all the sound. You have about 4 decibels in sound that it drops. So your drives are a lot quieter, and that's what people want is
Yeah.
quieter drives. So ball bearings are a thing of the past, and they're hard to manufacture. Ball bearings are hard to align, and they have to be a perfect quality in order for them to work, and they wear out
Hmm.
faster. In this particular case, again, most of the problems that I'm seeing are primarily because fluid bearings, their platters are heavier, they can bend a little bit more,
Yeah.
somebody dropped it over, and even a small drop might cause enough of this post to bend a little bit
Right.
while when it hits the table or
Right.
something.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool invention. I mean, they seem to be nicely suited for hard drives. Now, you said you found a way to fix these and replace them for under $100.
Yeah, it'll take you probably using kind of my method here that I'm describing in these videos, and especially in these slides. You have to basically practice, and it'll take you about 6 hours of practice to kind of get it down. If you basically follow what I have here as kind of the guide, it will solve a lot of problems, and maybe people can improve upon what I've actually chosen because I'm looking for things. I didn't go down the street and mill some parts because I could have done that, and I could have been a lot more fluid with what I'm doing here. It could have been a lot better selection of tools
But
that I could have made.
yeah, but more expensive for us.
Yeah, more expensive and not easily something that just anybody could have done.
Right.
So if you're in the middle of Utah and you want to figure out how to replace these bearings, you could spend a day practicing and making your own tools basically out of another hard drive, and you could make this work. And it's worth doing if you're going to do this a lot in the future.
Definitely. Definitely. So how do you do it?
Okay, well, if you want to go to the slide, well, so hit advance.
Here we go.
So this is basically kind of the overview of what I'm doing. I'm taking another drive that I've carved the pieces out of, and one of the biggest pieces that I had a problem with was trying to find a cylinder that was the right size so that I could actually put this into what's called an arbor press. You basically have to break this bottom piece free so that you can actually get the platters to fall out, and then you have to flip it over and do the reverse. And so basically what we're trying to do is get this particular piece, this one piece, out of the middle of a bad drive and replace it with a good one. So there's some redundancy here because you basically have to do this process 3 times. And so to get it down, you're going to do one that's going to be, I'm going to take a bad drive that either doesn't work or does work, it doesn't matter, and I'm going to basically tear it apart and get the parts out of it and use those parts. And then the second one's going to be, I'm going to remove the spindle from the bad hard drive, the client drive, the one that has the data on it that I want. I'm going to remove the bearings from this drive. And then I'm going to go to another good working drive. I'm going to remove the bearings from that drive, and I'm going to put them in this one that has the client drive in it. So I'm going to replace them.
Okay.
So those are kind of the steps I'm going to go through. And so if you go back to the slides, I'll advance. So go ahead. And so this is basically still in the overview mode. Basically, I'm going to use this drive, and I'm going to use the bottom of the drive as a tool to help remove by using what's called a drift. I'm going to punch the center pin out of the center of the platters without touching the platters or doing anything to it. So it does require, you to practice a little bit and try to get some good skills here. If you advance, I'll show the real pictures and the real drive as we're stepping through it.
What's this blue machine here? That's just a press?
Yes, it's basically an arbor press.
Okay. It's
about $45–50 at Harbor Freight, or if you can find a local shop, maybe an Ace or something like that.
Okay.
That it's an arbor press. I'm using a 1-ton arbor press.
Okay.
And there's several different models that are made all the way up to 2 tons and 3 tons, and sometimes they're used for cars or parts or pistons and things like that. So you ought to be able to find an arbor press. It's basically manpower. You're basically pulling on a pole that's attached to a gear, and the gear pushes pressure down on an arm. And so what you're looking at now is the bottom of the hard drive. And so you've seen this silver component before on the bottom of your drive. This is basically where this bearing is, and it's epoxied in. You can see this epoxy around it.
Right.
And basically it takes about 1 ton of pressure to break this thing free of that center pin. So this is what I'm trying to do. Now the problem is I needed something that's exactly the same size to punch this thing out.
Right.
So what I did was I took another drive and I just beat the crap out of it because it's chicken and the egg. You don't already have one to use, so I need to get one out of another drive.
Right.
So I actually just used a punch and a hammer, and I banged on it until I got one of these free. And so once it's physically free and I've got it out of the drive, then these are the platters I don't care about, so I can just kind of bang through the drift with a pin on the top and knock this piece out. And I'm going to use this as a spacer, basically, to put it in the right location. So if you advance from this slide, this is what it looks like after I've knocked the crap out of one and it falls out.
Okay.
The ring that's around it, basically you'll see the ring around the outside edge and it's black. That's actually the magnet. And the magnet actually is the piece that when it sits over the inside the drive, there's a coil. And the coil that it's sitting over, when you apply electricity to it, basically causes it to spin.
Right.
And so that's the magnet part. And you're going to try to break it free, obviously, without smashing this magnet on your client drive. But that's one of the pieces that you can actually do. So this is it upside down with the space. Now, if you see the next slide, if you hit the next slide, this is what it looks like on the top. And this pin is basically just jammed in there. This is the center pin that goes all the way through the cylinder inside the fluid dynamic bearings. So we're going to knock this out with something called the drift. We're going to pick one that's exactly the size of the circle itself, and we're going to put it over it. We're not going to use a punch because we don't want to damage it or mushroom it. I'm just going to use a drift, and I'm going to bang it out or use the arbor press to push it out.
Okay.
So you hit the next button. So this is what it looks like once I've got it out. This would be the client drive or whatever else once I'm done. But I just wanted to give you a picture of once it's done and it's clear. This is the spindle, and it's still got the platters mounted to it. It's still got the spacer on it. And so our goal is to basically have this client drive, this preserved in the process. So I'm going to go through those steps so that you can see that. And that's what we're going to try to do is get it out and then put it back in. Now, this pretty picture that you're looking at that is This is basically the coils that are wrapped around, the metals. Now, what IBM calls this thing itself is called the stator, stator.
Okay.
It's the stator, and basically it changes the state of your spinning. So when you apply a voltage in one direction, it spins one direction. You apply the voltage in the reverse direction, it spins in the reverse direction. And it's very similar to, and platters never spin in the reverse direction, so that would never happen or should never happen.
Right.
This is very similar to a way a speaker works. So when you actually see the coil on a speaker, this is the same idea. When a voltage is applied to it, it actually causes it to vibrate based on the magnet that's surrounding it. And so that vibration then causes the cone to vibrate and make sound. Well, in this case, it's just going to cause resistance in the opposite direction of the magnets, causing it to spin.
Right.
And so that's how the platters actually spin. This is the component that's necessary to make that actually happen. So the stator rises above the top of the platform of the bottom of the drive. And you'll notice before, when we actually were looking at the punch that we're going to punch out through the top of the drive,
Yeah.
that has a ring around the top. And that ring happens to be just about the right size to fit over the top of the stator.
Right.
So basically, I'm going to use that drive as a catch. So this is what I'm doing. I'm taking a bad one, and I'm just banging the crap out of it to get the centerpiece out. So that's just a hammer and a punch tool. Once I've actually knocked it free, you'll see, so it had epoxy, and basically that center hole is the exact same size of what the spindle bearings are themselves. And so I've knocked this one free, and then the next slide, you'll see, now it's free and clear, and it's just sitting there. Now I've got to take the center pin out. So I basically have to punch the center pin to get this thing free. So hit the next slide. So what I've done is I said, well, look, I got to have an area I can hold this thing so that when I push down on the arbor press, that the punch can punch it through, and I've got to have a way to catch it. And I don't have anything sitting around the arbor press that's the same size. What I figured out is if I took the bottom of the drive, so this is the bad drive that I just beat the crap out of. If I took the bottom of the drive and I just basically took like a drywall knife or something like that and put it in the hole, I could twist it and make the hole just a little bit bigger. So that basically it's big enough for the bearings to fall through. And you see that ring, there's a silver ring around the outside edge of that right now.
Yes.
Basically, the ring that's on the bottom of the drive, where the magnets and everything are the same exact size. And so I can put them on top of here, and it's suspended. It basically isn't touching the platter or doing any damage to the platter. So I can flip the platters over and have a hole that's a little bit bigger, and I can press it out.
Wow.
So if you go forward, you'll see I'm pressing it out. I'm making sure it's big enough for me to be able to slide one through. And so I had an extra one at this point to actually size it, and I'm just showing you that it's sized. But we're actually getting this out of the junk drive in order to make what I have in my hand.
Right. I see.
So this is basically what I'm doing now. I'm taking it. You can see on the bottom of the drive, and I'm wearing gloves. Basically, I'm going to put it over the middle of this drive. And then I'm going to use the arbor press, which is basically that metal piece that's sitting above it that you actually see in the slide right now.
Okay.
So this is what it looks like now. I'm sitting on the bottom of a drive, flipped upside down. And I've got it on my press. And I basically have a post that I bought. There's about a whole set of them was like $30. It wasn't a big deal. And I'm basically going to punch it through. And then you can advance to the next slide.
Okay.
And it basically will fall out of the bottom. And I'll have this particular piece. Now my problem is that getting one out, it'll still have this post on it. The post will still be sticking out. And for the one that I want to use as a regular tool in order to continue to remove all of my spindle motors and all of the fluid bearings in the future,
right.
I didn't want that nipple sticking off the top of it, basically.
Right.
The little post that's sticking out. So I got a cheap saw, basically. If you continue forward. Now you can use a hacksaw or you can use whatever. You just need to make it very smooth. So we're going to cut off the end of that so that we actually have one smooth chunk of metal. Now, I used a $25 saw I got at Harbor Press, basically, that had a vise and everything already attached to it. If you hit next, you'll see the one I used. So this is what I used. It was $25. It had a little vise, and it had a circular saw on it with a safety button. And so basically, I could cut this little piece off and smooth it out all in one fell swoop. So I just kind of put it up against it and butt up against it and then smoothed it out. And so once I had it smoothed out, you'll see now it fits perfectly over the bottom of a drive in that same exact space.
Right.
And so I could use this to push out using the